I believe a voting person should be an informed person, and that's the purpose of this entire series of interviews for Bluffton's 2023 Town Council and mayoral election process. I implore you to watch these videos, share them with folks, just get the word out so you can make an informed decision. That's the whole purpose of this process. I'd especially like to thank the Greater Bluffton Chamber of Commerce, and in full transparency, I am on the board of the chamber, but it was still a huge ask and allowance from Natalie, who runs the board. So big thanks to them just for letting us use their email list and platform to help get this word out to all the businesses that are part of the chamber. Today I'm here at Kitty's Cook Shop with Bridgette Frazier. She's doing her second run for town council. Bridgette, thank you for joining me. I wish we could have recorded everything we just talked about. That was a really good combo.
It was. Well, thank you for setting this up.
Absolutely. So, I kind of gave you the preface of why I'm doing this because while I'm newer to the town, I felt like I knew enough about the town. And when I was told elections were coming up, I knew of your name. I knew of Larry Toomer. I heard of Dan Wood, but I didn't really know who you are as people, what your platforms were. So I was like, well, if I don't, and I got here right before most of the people moved here, those people probably don't either. So that's why I'm doing this today, right? So I want everybody to get to know you, your background, connect with you, on a level, know where you stand on some of the topics. And I did say that while there are a few, they are complex, so it's gonna take a little time to go through. And then just, anything else you want people to know about you. So let's start from the top. Where are you originally from and when did you come to Bluffton?
So I'm originally from Bluffton. I was born in Charleston, and my dad's roots, everything are here. Even my mom's roots are from here. And so we came back to Bluffton full time when I was about 4. Okay. And have been here ever since. You
have a big family history here.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little about that?
Huge family history. Yeah. So my both families, like I said, the Frazier and the Pinckney side are from the area. And my mom's maiden name is Wilson. And through some genealogy study, we found that her roots go back here too, in terms of her great-grandfather was actually indigenous Native American from the area. Wow. But my dad's Pinckney roots started on Pinckney Colony. Okay. Back to the 1700s, and it was one of the largest plantations actually in the Southeast. And one of his descendants, mine too, had some involvement with the Campbell Five, and we found their that timeline when they began doing their research on kind of who purchased the church and where the church came from and the history and all that. The Frazier side of my family has roots to Belfair Plantation. And so they've been here in the most literal sense of the term. When people talk about Benya, they've been here for quite some time. And so through the evolution of that inception and even up into modern day, my family's always been very impactful in helping to direct Bluffton, give back, just be a steward of this community.
That's awesome. That's a lot of history. That's hundreds and hundreds of years.
Hundreds. I always share with someone, I regret not valuing or understanding really the gravity of that history in childhood. I would go with my grandmother when my dad would be in Belfair because he was a roofer, always worked for himself. And she could point to the tree where she was born. And for me, then it was just kind of oh, cool. But looking back now, it's man, how huge is that? Yeah. That at that age, here she is almost 80, she still has those memories and the stories behind it, to kind of feel just that presence has been ongoing.
Is that tree still up?
I would imagine it is. I wish I documented it to be able to go in there. I'm sure it is.
That's wild.
It's very wild.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So while we're on the topic of family, I reached out to each candidate and I said, hey, pick a place that matters to you. And you didn't tell me what this was. You just gave me an address. But tell me where we are today because I am in love with everything that's going on in here right now.
Sure. So this is actually a family-owned restaurant. It's called Kitty's Cook Shop. And it was constructed in the 1967 and they opened in 1968. And it was known in its heyday as a very bustling, cute little eccentric diner. People, would come in for milkshakes and they've been infamous for their burgers, fried chicken and stuff like that. and even at one point had a fuel station where people could come and get gas. Particularly, Black residents were able to come and get gas during that time. And Michael C. Riley was right across the street from here. And, we have an elementary school now named Michael C. Riley.
Right there.
Yeah. And the new one, is on Burnchurch, but
Yeah.
it used to be here.
Yeah.
And it was a graded school that started in the early 1900s and then transformed into like a K through 8, and then eventually became also the high school. Okay. And where during that time we were segregated. So at that time it was only for Black students because they weren't admitted anywhere else. Okay. And then once integration happened, then they went to the McCracken High School. But the school itself got a new construction around like 91, I believe it was, 89 or 90. And that's when it moved to Burnchurch. But I was actually a part of the last kindergarten class who attended the school when it was on Goethe Road. That's and then, awesome. First semester we were here, second semester we went over to Burnchurch. But the family's restaurant became the cafeteria to the Michael C. Riley High School when their cafeteria burnt down. Yeah. And so students walked from over there to come over here to be able to have lunch. And after time, just through, powers that be, unfortunately, and people that blocked them from being open again, the restaurant closed around about the, I believe, early 70s and has not been open since. And it's been a fight for him to kind of keep that family history going again. His parents, unfortunately, have died through that fight, but he's still keeping it on. J.C. Frazier is. Mm-hmm. And a few folks have come in to help him get it going, and the town of Bluffton unanimously worked, to help him get his all of his permittings and stuff like that. So everyone's excited to see this project come back to life. Yeah, I just want folks seeing this to realize the scope of what you just said. J.C., your cousin, yes. Right, cousin, his parents were fighting for this because were they the original owners? They were the original owners. And you said it was, like 50 years of fighting that's been going on? So this isn't just like something that happened 10 years ago. No, it's happened in the early 70s. And JC has not given up. No, he's not. At all. So I think he'll do his parents proud. This place, I wish we could just flip the cameras around, but like when you walk in here, you feel like you're walking back into some sort of history. Like, I didn't know what this was, and you gave me a little preface, but when I walked in, I was like, oh my God, this is what I'm looking for. This is like the cool bar top. You can do the milkshakes, get a burger, just... The vibe. It's the right vibe. It is the right vibe. And what I love about the project so much, and for me, like, this is Bluffton. The project and this is Bluffton is that, it's been a 50-year struggle for him to get back open, but everybody who's involved with this project, it's not a Black issue. It's not a white issue. It's not a you're from here, you're not from here. Like, people try to make those issues and divide us when people go to have conversations about equity. It's like, get outside of yourself. It's not a personal focus. It's just when an inequity exists, it requires all hands on deck wherever it is. And so we have a lot of well-known builders and stuff in the area who are working with him. Mm-hmm. Everyone from the town who's working, it's all races, it's all demographics, people who've even come in and, purchased food or contributed money for him to get equipment. It's like a true community project in that sense. And that to me is, it's what I love about this area. Like, we all look out for each other, whether you're being here or not being from here is not the issue. It's a mindset. Yeah. So the people who've migrated here have become Bluffton, and they help, create that sense of community. And that's all we care about. We don't care about your zip code. Mm-hmm. So when you come here, you're here. That's awesome. And you believe that idea that we all are tethered, to one another. You answered the next question I was going to ask. What do you like about Bluffton? That would be it, right? That would be it. Honestly, like for me, I'm from the area, but I lived almost 10 years in South Florida. Mm-hmm. And I loved it, and going there was a culture shock. Being from a small town, I went to school in Orangeburg, South Carolina, even smaller town. And going to South Florida, it's kind of like a Disney World for a 21-year-old on salary with no parents, no anything. You have Miami's, X amount of hours away. You can get to Orlando in less than 2 hours. And so being there, I loved it. But each time I would come home, I missed stuff. Yeah. And I was, I realized then like how magical Bluffton was. And I was like, man, like if I could be anywhere else in the world, like I want to be here. I'm over the draw of, the city, the flashing lights, the beach, or whatever else. Like I love here because it is that magical place. It is like when people go through, you can see a whole community in a matter of hours raise $100,000 to put somebody back in a home, or to help someone cover a medical expense, or get a vehicle to get their children back and forth to work. And it's like, I want to be there. Like, I want to continue to be a part of a community that really impacts change.
Yeah.
And so it's that for me that I love about Bluffton.
I like that.
Yeah.
And I don't disagree with that. It's like, it's nice. I guess maybe it happens when you get a little older too. When you're younger,
Yeah.
Miami's pretty sweet. But then when you get a little older, you start respecting what Bluffton is, or an area like Bluffton, where it's like, you can go visit the crazy, right?
Yeah.
That's what Vegas is for, to visit. You don't want to live there. So what made you want to get involved with the town?
Well, I've always been fascinated with the world of just like politics and community building. Growing up, like, we were stationary in front of the TV. It was obligatory to watch, CBS News. So, watching the Dan Rathers and hearing the stories of what people were doing in other communities and stuff, I was just drawn to that. Even in high school, I, was a part of different clubs, and I was always like, in a leadership role, just helping organize and create stuff. And it carried through to college, and coming back home, it was something, even as I was visiting, that would kind of resonate with me. But I, come from a long line of community builders, through my dad, through my grandmother and her impact, through aunts and uncles. And it was just a natural instinct for me that I don't like complaining about problems. Like someone said, when you come to complainers, like, you can give them a solution to everything and they're going to find a problem. And I never wanted to be on that end of the stick. Like, I always wanted to be solution oriented. So I more so look at, how can I come in and help? How can I come in and, like, aid in the progress of whatever? Because I really believe that it's our responsibility to create the community that we want. And it's not an expectation that anyone owes us anything. Like, nobody's entitled to anything. It's like, we create that. And so that's what drew me into that, and especially for Bluffton, because, like I said, it is a magical place. It's a place that I love, and it's a place too sometimes where certain voices I felt were not being heard. And it's not a race thing, because I felt that community-wise, like, it's responded to that. I felt that from that platform of being a working everyday person, working in hourly wages and stuff, as we start to see, like, gentrification and development of certain things happening, I start to see, like, a disconnect when it comes to thinking outside of the box. Like, how do we really get in and dig in about affordable housing? Like, what are some other issues, that we can bring in? Because those before have done great jobs with that. Is just, let me bring in my voice on how I can help impact it just in other places I've lived, maybe other things I've researched and I've seen it have worked. Let me lend that perspective to the conversation, but not looking at it from an angle of they're all failures. Let me go in and clean up their whatever. That's the wrong way for anyone to enter the arena of trying to help in politics. Is more so looking at what has worked while making an assessment of maybe what needs improvement and how can you add to it, but not like demonizing people and getting stuck into like more so the back and forth of stuff, because there's no resolution.
Yeah,
in
you'll
that.
never come to a resolution.
Yeah, and I'm not with that. I'm not with that. I don't like doing the discourse of all the negative stuff or the back and forth, because for me it's unproductive. I'm more so like, okay, we know the problem exists. What is it? Let's get it done. Like, I want to work towards
Solution
solutions.
oriented. I always say my best employees are the ones that call and they say, there's a problem, but here's how we're fixing it. Instead of be like, I got a problem, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
Oh, no. You want to bring that solution. So I appreciate that about you. It's important, especially to have somebody like that in the town, rather than make a bunch of noise, figure out how we're going to fix it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And not looking at it like it's a your problem. It's a our problem.
Yeah. We're all here.
It's a everybody issue.
Yep. So speaking of issues, and you've touched on a few of them in what you just said, and I know I kind of prefaced this with you, but for the sake of the video, I reached out to various Facebook groups,
right.
And I said, what are your issues? What are your concerns?
Right.
What would you like to hear from candidates, folks that are looking to run for the first time, folks that are running again? And speaking of which, how many times have you run?
This is my second time running for town council. So I'm an
the last
incumbent.
round was your first?
Yes.
Cool. Just trying to make sure I got that right. So I would say 90% of the issues or concerns were all the same, which I think is pretty cool. And there was only I'd say a handful of them, which I do actually have almost all of them here. There was one outlier, but but I thought it was an important topic to
Sure.
talk about, so I'd love to get your opinion on that. I put these in no particular weighted order. I really just was copying and pasting them in,
Yeah.
and I was like, all right, these all consolidate to the same thing.
Fire away.
And if you look at that paper, that's what I said to Tim or Dan the first time. Okay, so you're getting a way more consolidated question. So the first one that came up that people were concerned about was conflict of interest, mainly being folks who become part of a political arena on the council as the mayor, who also own businesses, get an unfair advantage. Do you feel like that could be mitigated? Is there a way to circumvent that problem, or is it fair and it's also just part of politics and playing the game?
Well, it's actually not true. And we don't
Okay.
get an unfair advantage. It
Okay.
becomes the opposite. For instance, I'm developing a project here that's caused contention for some people who just, rather hurl out fallacies and understand the truth of what's going on. But we don't get to circumvent processes. Because of our positions, we actually have to make sure we're actually doing things to the letter more than what the average person may do. Mm-hmm. We still file applications. We have to go through the same process. We don't get to speed up, the review through the planning commission. We don't get to bypass development review committee. We don't get to say, well, we're gonna scratch the UDO here and do what we want. Like, we're in compliant, to the fullest extent, because everything's public records, mm-hmm. the meetings, the agendas, the documentation that you submit. So it doesn't give you a fair advantage. It actually gives you way more scrutiny than what the average person who may fall through the loops or fall through the cracks would be able to do. Because we're under that microscope and because we have that high expectation of what we're supposed to do, we do that, and we do it with the level of fidelity that, regardless of people's opinions, we don't deviate from. And for many, it would probably be a disadvantage. And I can point to several instances. For instance, my project is involving a historic structure. And so with that historic structure, there are several ways that you get to rehab it. You can do traditional preservation, you can do reconstruction, you can do rehabilitation, and you can also do, there's another one I can't remember, you can do like a rebuild. But in order to do that, there's certain criteria you have to follow. Like, you can't just go and put up stucco and it originally had siding. You can't go and put up shingles if it originally had a tin roof. You have to follow things to the T, and you have to vet people who actually do that the right way. And so with our project, we did that, and it was actually more costly than going in and taking the building, and we could have pushed it to the back of the property if we wanted and just let it be preserved in the truer sense, which means it goes and it probably rot and dilapidate on its own. And you have to actually do things, the right way. But that's an example of doing it the right way. There was another gentleman who isn't a part of anything political, who had a historic structure and was supposed to catalog it by taking it apart, by, taking pictures, by, binding it, storing it, so the preservationists could see it. And once they got down to the frame somewhat of it, they knocked their building down. They did not follow what they were supposed to be doing. And there was no consequences of the actions, because unfortunately we didn't have any in place. And it was trusted that what he said he was going to do and what was agreed to in the Historic Preservation Commission that he was going to do, and he didn't do that. And so you don't see outrage a lot of times when instances like that, because it's like, well, where's the checks and balances? Where's the public outcry on someone who said they were going to do something to a building that was far more historic in Bluffton, dating back to the latter 1800s, to a building that I have that wasn't as historic, but I consider it to be, and believed in it so much so that I wanted to treat it in a way that it would be preserved and be around for years to come.
So you're saying you got, if you're serving, especially locally here, you got the magnifying glass on you.
Absolutely, you do.
So it's harder to get away with stuff.
And it's harder, and it's also like, that's when it comes down to integrity. Like they said, it's not about what you do when people are watching, but what do you do when people aren't watching? And so knowing that, that character is all you have to stand on, it's not even worth it, to buck the rules or not follow it, because how are we able to affect policy, create policy that we in turn can't go back in and follow? It says, a lot about us, but it also says a lot about our supporters if they believe that we were those type of people. Yeah. To your question there, we don't get to do that.
Okay, that's fair enough. Another one that came up was term limits. Does the town have them? Do you believe in them? Is there a possibility where you feel somebody could be serving too long and it becomes self-serving rather than serving the people?
Term limits, is something for me that I don't know that it's applicable here. I think in any instance, it's more so the will of the people, especially when it's not an involvement of like a super PAC that could be pumping billions into somebody that whether you want them here or not, they're going to be here, or, they can leverage something like gerrymandering to kind of get their way and serve infinite terms. So on this level, I don't know that it's applied because I still believe that everything's in the hands of the will of the people. So if it's something that, the majority of the people said we should do, then it goes on the ballot, then it's what's supported. I still believe in the organic nature of local politics, that people ultimately vote for who they want.
Yeah.
And we've had politicians who have come into the community, have been very new into the community, and have gotten elected just off of the platform that they run on and the constituents who believe in what they're saying. And so for me, I think I'm always going to side on that principle and that belief. And I don't think that being in office on the local level is going to be where, someone's serving too long. I just think because they are able to have a pulse really on the needs of the community and serving not in a capacity for any one group or any, single benefit, but more so understanding that our community is unlike any other. And you cannot be effective here without knowing people. You have to be out. You have to, take the time to get to learn the community and those needs and understand the history really of what the community is. And I think that's been effective in our government. I think that is, what's allowed us to make a lot of the successes we have. Of course, there's always room for growth in terms of learning curves. But I think keeping that nature there is important because you really don't get to affect a lot of times true change, maybe, in the visionary sense of it, if you're, maybe served to a one term. People think that politics is like a quick fix thing, like you can come in tomorrow and you can change everything. You really can't, because there's processes in place, there's procedures in place. You have to go through certain things, and there are things that aren't really even in your scope to be able to affect. There are other entities involved there. So I think having more time in these offices on a local level gives you an opportunity to build collaborations with jurisdictions that are neighboring our areas that you need. Yeah. When it comes to governing the roadways and other things, it's not a Bluffton focus because Bluffton doesn't own the roads, but you need to be able to have connections with the SCDOT, with the county, and things like that take time.
Oh, we're getting there. That's on the list. And that actually leads to the next one, which is infrastructure.
What are the odds?
What are the odds? Good timing. So look, and I said this to Dan, and infrastructure is a very wide word, right? But you got land issues. You have traffic, road infrastructure issues, schools, right? And then a labor shortage, which all kind of support the infrastructure of this community. I'm going to break it down for each topic here. I'm going to start with housing. I looked up the definition of what affordable housing is because I was like, is there an actual legal definition to it? And there is a federal definition, but I looked up something on Google and then I actually found the federal government definition. It says, affordable housing is housing that a household can pay for while still having leftover money for other necessities like food, transportation, and healthcare. That means what's considered affordable depends on the household's income. Mm-hmm. Federal government typically defines housing as affordable when it consumes no more than 30% of a household's income. With that said, interest rates are going up, inflation's going up, and we have a very high demand for our area and really low supply. Do you think in our area, to that definition, affordable housing is possible? Do you think we can get there, and especially for the folks that need it the most?
Well, absolutely. A lot of people either a light bulb goes off or they disagree with my definition of affordable housing. Affordable housing has been set by the AMI. And a lot of people don't understand what that is.
What's the AMI real quick?
I'm going to say it. A lot of people don't understand it, but it's the average and median income set for an area. And so each area, it differs. So for Bluffton, I tell them they've done a great job with affordable housing, but it's affordability for who? That's the issue. Yeah. So affordable housing for those at that 80% or higher, they've done great because they've bought homes. Mm-hmm. We have builders who can't build fast enough because somebody's able to afford it. Mm-hmm. The problem is providing housing for those who are below that AMI that traditionally would not be eligible for the mortgage that these builder or developers are going after. So Bluffton's average median income since the last census is $92,000. for a household. So, a mortgage, just like a rent, you're going to be eligible for 3 times that amount. So developers are setting homes 280, 300,000 as a starting point. The people who need housing are hourly workers. So they're not in that AMI rate.
Nope.
They're the 30% and lower. And so housing in every community has been geared towards affordability, but not for the people who are below that AMI, because they're not looking at mortgage lenders providing housing to them, because that's not what the developers are building at. So the problem that we have is thinking outside of the box, as well as bringing in developers who have the expertise in creating homes for those similar in the fashion that what Habitat has done.
Yeah.
Habitat Humanity has done a great job of building housing for those below that AMI level, and it has allowed so many people, family members of mine, friends, to be able to access the idea of what home ownership is, and without them, it wouldn't have happened. So I look at companies like that, and it's like, why aren't more governments partnering with them, where you have land, space, and stuff available, because they have the blueprint. They've done it. We have 2 neighborhoods here that have benefited from that, and the homes and the communities there are thriving, and they're great places to live. Another suggestion, that I'd like to bring to the table that I'm going to be mentioning in our upcoming strategic plan. For instance, our UDO currently does not have a way forward for tiny homes, for instance. So a lot of people think of tiny homes and they think they come on like a mobile trailer type thing, a hitch, and you just park it and you can pull it. And it's like, no, there are communities that have foundational tiny home structures that have, brick foundations, concrete foundations, excuse me. They have heating and air. They have all the accommodations. And there's even a place in Savannah, because I volunteer and cook food for the former homeless veterans shelter there. They have right now just one bedroom accommodations, but they're moving to accommodate families as they started to see there was a need for that. So they're now building 2 and 3 bedroom tiny home structures. I'd like to see us moving into that vein in that sense, and understanding that that's where we have to be, because we don't have a community without having housing for our hourly workers. Nobody's building housing to address those needs, or apartments to address those needs. And so that's going to be the demographic that continues to struggle here.
Yeah.
And you can't have a community without it, because there is no small business without a workforce.
Yeah.
There is no workforce if they can't live here. They did the numbers in terms of how much of our population actually lives here and works here. And the majority of the people who are commuting even to this area, well over 50, don't live in Bluffton, and because they can't afford to. We have some people who commute as far as Fairfax and Estill and Hampton to come work here. We have people living in shelters in Savannah that come to work in Bluffton.
Yeah.
And so I was a part of Bluffton MLK, where we did a podcast on site at one of the local businesses here, Reserve Services Inc., on the corner of Simmonsville and Buck Island. And we asked, those hourly workers there, what's AMI? No one knew. And so we gave that explanation because we wanted to educate people on that. And we asked them about affordable housing. What do you think of in terms of what the average apartment's going for? And, people gave ranges everywhere from $500 a month to maybe $1,000. Shocked when we said, no, it's almost at $2,000. And, to see the sincerity in their eyes when they understand that all this while, as we talk about what affordable housing is, it's not providing the needs of what they will ever be able to access. And for me, that's a problem that has to be looked at. So when I talked earlier about that out of the box thinking, I looked at it in the sense of, I think our, council has done a great job with affordable housing, but it's been affordability for those who could reach whatever that AMI limit was.
Yeah.
We've not done a good job with addressing the hourly workers, because they are not often included in that conversation because they are below that. And for me, that's where focuses have to be. So that's my take when it comes to how do we address housing for those who need it. When we look at infrastructure needs, there are a lot of things I think that have to be considered, not just with roadways. That's a conversation that takes a regional approach. We don't own our roads, especially the ones that impact and see the most traffic. 278, the Parkway, even May River Road. Those are all either state or county owned and governed roads. We can't put speed limits there. We can't widen them. We can't shorten them, because we just don't have that control. But the areas and places that we can do in terms of putting more commercial space in well, not more commercial space is already there, but looking at getting more commercial development in those areas to where we can reduce some of that congestion.
Yeah.
Because we're seeing that the majority of services are still here in the incorporated district. And so a lot of people, where we see all the development, like in the New Riverside area, there's still a lack of services to accommodate the amount of people there. So when I think of infrastructure, it goes towards things that are going to address that needs, to build and to have so many people in such a centralized area, but then not have the services to be able to accommodate the amount of people is problematic, because this is why you see so many people, they have to get in their cars to come and go to a pharmacy, to get a dentist appointment, to come and see a general practitioner. And so I think that's one of the ways that would be helped. And also looking at other services. I'm glad to see now that we have another cable company, internet company coming in to town, because that's one of the things people don't consider. And even business wise, it's understanding that we all can't do everything. So one internet company should not expect that they forever are going to be able to monopolize and provide services to such a growing town. It's good competition to bring in someone else to help alleviate that, because we're seeing now an increase in outages and other things, and that cuts into productivity for businesses that rely on it, for schools as kids are in the middle of testing, to get a message prompting that the shortage is out.
Yeah.
So I look at the whole scope of stuff like that.
Okay. You touched on roads, and I don't think we have much more to say about it than what you said. You can't widen them, shorten them. You don't even own them. Dan Wood made a good explanation of it's a lot of the infrastructure issues are like this. It's not just Bluffton.
It's not.
It's the Bluffton and the county and the state, and that takes time, which goes back to like the term limit conversation, where it's like you're not going to flip things around in 3 years. It's going to take a long time to get this done. So you got to have a long-term vision. Do you think there is a logical way of balancing, and maybe you already answered the question, but I'm going to ask it, is there a logical way to balance the building of new homes and improving, I believe what folks meant by infrastructure was the road infrastructure?
Right.
Like it's like a chicken or the egg scenario,
Yeah.
what comes first? What do you think about that?
I think it's a hard conversation to have without getting back to the root of it. So a lot of people, and that's why I'm grateful that you're doing this, and I hope many of conversations like this happen just so people can have that information at their disposal. But going back to the root cause of it, a lot of people just see all the developments like, why can't they stop? It's too much. Someone sold their soul. Marisol is in bed with the developers and she's getting rich and all this other stuff. And the reality is that's just not the case. There was a time, where the previous government council here did have development agreements. And a lot of these development agreements have been purchased decades ago. And a lot of people didn't cash in on it because there was a sense on, you didn't buy it to develop it and you have a town of 800 people, because who's going to go in it?
Right.
You don't have restaurants, you don't have services. People in other areas aren't coming to buy homes in an area that's really just not developed. And so what we're seeing now with this explosion is people waited on this moment. And now that all the people are here, we're seeing these development agreements now being used. And some have been sold from developer to developer. And the reality is, when you look at the legality of it all, we can't stop that.
Yeah.
Because if a person has legally purchased it with those development rights, a lot of times they don't even have to come to council to get the approval. They go through planning commission, and these things are set up, according to state standards. You have to have boards and commissions. You have to have a way of how they're structured, and they have to have the rules and procedures and all this other stuff, and how they're governed. But if a person has all of that together and they're not doing something that triggers an amendment or like a change to an existing master plan, they just go through planning commission, their permitting process, and that's it. But I think the issue that's missing in that, one of the things that we can impact currently, is looking at some of the UDOs. And so
What is a UDO? It's the second
it's
time you said that.
It's our Unified Development Ordinance.
Okay.
And so it's how you build, what you're able to build, the height, the scale of it, even the aesthetics of it. I think the more reasonable approach is going at it where we can impact that. We can't stop people from building that already have those rights, but we can look at how they're building. So maybe it's us changing the density. Maybe it's saying like, if a person has X amount amount of acres, then it should be permitted for, either this size, this amount, the structure. I think it's looking at ways like that that'll be able to help change that conversation. But other than just like stopping development for ones that already exist, rights that people already own, we don't have the jurisdiction to do that. But I think it's definitely a cautionary tale of what's happened for us to look at places that have not been developed yet, for rights that have not been purchased yet, and how do we respond to those current ones to ensure that we don't have the issue we're dealing with now, whereas the residential has over-exasperated the commercial services provided for there. So, it's not people moving into an area where the infrastructure, the services that are needed to man that area aren't available. I think that's the learning curve that we can address right now.
Okay, so you believe we need more commercial to satisfy the residential, which would then limit the traffic?
Yes, in the areas where they currently are.
Yeah.
We did a study about a few months ago, particularly in the area west of Buckwalter, where there are no services, and it's areas where there's one pharmacy right now that services the New Riverside area.
Yeah.
That's the biggest concentration of our population, and so there is an outcry for people there in the sense of that's what they want. So when you look at our zoning maps and what's allowed and what's available, that's the one source where it has not met or kept up to code with what our master plan is, and that's commercial services. So when we talk about commercial development, we're not talking about we're wanting attractions to come in, or we're looking for more restaurants or whatever. It's more of those medical services. It's more people saying like it's a 6-7 month wait list for me to see a doctor.
Yeah.
I can't find a dentist. I'm looking for childcare. There is no childcare in my area. Those are the type of services that we're talking about that would definitely help with traffic, because right now people have to drive to wherever they can get that accommodation, and it's currently not in the area that they live. And so when I think of the development, for me, like that's the problem that we need to address and we need to solve, because all of that residential construction has happened in that area, but the services to provide to the people living there have not stayed in accordance. And so that's definitely something that we're focusing on, but I think that's where more energy has to be placed, and I think that would alleviate a lot of the traffic.
Okay, cool. First responders. Many have said they're worried we don't have enough law enforcement and first responder presence, and they believe it's linked to pay as well. What are your thoughts on the current state of our first responders, and do we need improvement?
For someone who has been in adamant support of first responders, I will say that some of that's true, some of it's not.
Okay.
Our current council has done an amazing job in terms of meeting the demands of our police department when it comes to salary, even being able to give increases. We've seen about 2 or 3 increases with the police department since I know my time on council, and it actually occupies the largest budget for our funding, because we believe in our police department and we love the community sense that they bring to the area. They're not people who just pull someone over for a ticket or go in and do raids. Our community officers are really out and about in schools. They're in neighborhoods. They're doing like relief efforts, for people. So we value that, and we understand that to retain the type of people we want with that mindset, we have to be able to offer a pay that's comparable to that.
Right.
So while in the past there definitely has been, low pay, there is still there's not low pay with our officers now, but it's definitely a pay that should match where our area is in terms of the needs of inflation that we talked about, the needs of housing. And so it's keeping that balance to make sure that the increases match that, so that our officers are able to sustain a livelihood for themselves and their families here. I know one of the efforts that we've done is we had our chief come in, and he did a pay scale study in comparison to other town populations comparable to ours, and just where we are and where we need to be. And on many of those areas, we were on par. In some, there were areas of improvement. And so we made adjustments to be able to reach that level, knowing that it's not going to be an overnight process, just understanding that the funding has to come from somewhere. And, we can't keep taxes at a certain rate or, what have you, and not be able to address certain needs. And so in order to keep a happy medium where we're not increasing taxes or revenue sources, but we're working within what we have, we're definitely meeting those needs and always looking for areas to be able to accommodate them when we can. I know during COVID, we were all unanimous on being able to give them emergency, hazard pay because they were there every single day. Everyone else could be shut in from the pandemic. They could not. And so we were able to give them that increase on top of what they were taking home. Because we value and believe that, like I said, we have an amazing police department here, and we want them to know and understand that. And any chance we get to look at how we can give them increases, we do that.
Schools was, I think, the hottest topic. And, after talking to Dan, now talking to you, kind of learning the development plan and strategy where you have the right services closer. Like, I'm in that New Riverside area right now. Like, I totally get what you're saying. Schools are like super over, like the balance is off, right? There's a large disparity of student volume versus pay and teachers to students. What do you think the answer is to get the balance of the schools right, like per district, and attracting more teachers and all the supporting staff? Like, how do we make that more competitive and attractive for folks to want to come to Bluffton to be a teacher?
Absolutely. And you're speaking to my heart. I'm 15 years a retired educator, teaching middle and high school English. I think the issue that we're dealing with is not a one problem issue. I think nationally it has become cumbersome to be a teacher. And whereas before that wasn't the case, your main worry may have been pay and cost of living. And now with so many other things, you've gone to school for X amount of years, you have all these certificates, you have all these licenses, you have all these PDs you have to do and keep up with, and yet you have everyone telling you how to do your job and no one listening to you saying how you're able to execute it or trusting the licenses and the degrees that you've earned that you can do that job. And so for a lot of people, it's just no longer kind of as beneficial as it used to be, because mentally it's draining and exhausting for a lot of teachers as they're dealing with inflation and the lack of access to housing that they can afford. It's also all the policies now just that they're being bombarded with, and where we see so many people coming from the outside that, are bringing in national politics, and the whole book banning thing and all these other things that really just don't even apply to what teachers are dealing with here locally, has been a turnoff and a deterrent for a lot of teachers to stay in the classroom in an already taxing jobs. So we have so many people who rally around first responders, and I consider teachers that. At any given time, a teacher sees a child sometimes more than a parent does. For 8, sometimes to 10 hours a day, your child is in a school. And so it's like, where's the value? Where's the respect for educators? And so we can't just talk about making sure that there's access to affordable housing. We also have to talk about the culture created where we support teachers to do what they went to school to do, that we believe them, that they're able to make the impact that their licenses say that they can. And I think when we change that environment of how we treat teachers, how we support teachers, and how we advocate for them, is going to help go along with the conversations around affordable housing as well. Now, when it comes to like the construction and the building needs that we're seeing, again, that's the same issue in terms of there has to be foresight with that. Now, we don't control our schools. That's a county issue. However, I've always said that there has to be a better collaboration between the school board at some point, or the superintendent, and the local municipalities, in a sense of, as they're building schools, they can have a conversation, because we have the maps to say, like, this is how many people are going to go in the area. These are the projected projects that are, have gone through planning commission that are going to be approved for development. Is this amount of units going in this neighborhood? So you can kind of see a scope of what the needs are going to be. And it's almost like schools are being built with some of that in mind, but we're building schools and schools are being built to capacity. So it's kind of like the minute that they're open, they're already over full. I've taught where, in buildings where we've had to have classrooms in the cafeteria. we've had to have classrooms in the auditorium because there are not enough spaces. And so it's kind of like in Beaufort County, we have to get an understanding of how we're building schools to provide for future needs. You know, coming from Florida, we didn't have that issue. Schools existed, and you rarely saw new schools being built because they would either add-on extensions, they'd have multi-level schools because it was an understanding of where we are today is not necessarily the needs that are going to come down the pike. And when you're building, you may not have more land to go out and purchase. You know, it shouldn't be, you know, a need to always provide and come up with all these additional, you know, referendums or funding sources. Kind of like, let's do things from a strategic approach that we understand that if growth is coming to this area with another development project in 2 years, well, we need to get another wing now. When we're building this school, let's leave maybe 3 or 4 acres of space because we may have to add an addition, and let's put on a freshman academy or change this to an elective wing, and we can put, you know, all these classes here.
Thinking forward.
You have to,
Yeah.
you know, you have to.
Absolutely. This is always an interesting one, and I wish I was talking about All Joy Donuts, but the donut holes of Bluffton. You know, it ties a lot of these issues together. You know what I'm talking about, right? With like the different pockets that are Beaufort County. It sounds messy.
It is messy.
I think it personally is. Do you think if we could eliminate those, and Dan Wood was saying it's a hard thing to do, and annexation is a hard thing to get, do you feel like if we eliminated that, it would make some of this conversation easier?
Not really, because, you know, they're called donut holes from a jurisdictional standpoint in terms of voting or policing, but when it comes to the collection of, you know, property taxes that fund schools and all this other stuff, they're still counted in that. They're still counted in who's utilizing services, so they're not isolated from that standpoint. But it is a difficult thing to do because we can't just go in and arbitrarily, you know, take away a donut hole and incorporate anyone into Bluffton without their consensus to do so. And it's a state regulation, actually. And you'd be surprised. There are some places in donut holes that may want to be incorporated, and there are other places that are adamantly against even the thought of being incorporated in Bluffton. And, you know, I believe it's their right to feel that way if that's what they, you know, choose to do. I'm always at the will of the majority when it comes to stuff like that. Yeah. But in certain areas where it makes sense, you know, it would be nice if there were areas that wanted to incorporate that could, you know, do that. To alleviate donut holes, but again, it's something that's out of our control. But when we think of, for those that don't understand some of the things that go in it, for instance, we have neighborhoods right now that where the police can come, a community like Vista View, for instance. Well, Bluffton PD is not called out to the first half of it; it's only the second half. Because the second half is unincorporated, the first half isn't. So the sheriff's office will come to one side, and Bluffton PD comes to another side. But when something happens, it's just like, oh, the police, whatever. Well, you're dealing with two different
response rates.
Two different response rates in two different jurisdictions. And so for issues like that, from a safety standpoint, we would, of course, love to alleviate that. But again, it's a matter that we just don't have the control to kind of go in and usurp. We can't do that. And so that's something else, too. When people look at local municipalities, they think what works in one area automatically applies here. We're all different. You know, a city like Hilton Head governs their own departments and things like that. We don't even control our own fire department, for instance. It's a lot of different players going on here. So when people get down and really assess a problem, it's kind of like you have to go to the root to really understand the makeup of things before people start speaking on what should and shouldn't be done. Yeah. Because you really don't know.
Yeah, I think that's the hard thing for a lot of folks is they just think, this is my town. It doesn't have to be Bluffton. This is my town. We have the town PD. We have the town fire department. We got our ambulances that go to our town hospital, but it's not like that anymore.
No, not like that.
Yeah.
And in a sense, it's kind of like when you think of community, for me, that type of stuff makes sense. But again, you have to have the revenue base to support it. And so whereas you have one group who's always adamantly against, like, don't raise taxes, don't increase it. You can't have that and then also, you know, downcry certain services because we would not be able to afford staffing an ambulance, EMT department, or even
out of the current budget.
Right. You know, to bring things like that on board, you're going to have to be able to compensate. So, you know, the EMTs they're privately sourced and funded, you know, and it's sad because if you don't have insurance, Most EMTs sometimes won't even take you beyond certain places. They'll come and take you to the hospital and bill you for it.
Yeah.
But if you get there and you're like, oh, I have to go elsewhere.
They're not taking you. Calling
Not
Uber.
unless you know
Yeah.
it's a medical case where the hospital requires it. But for instance, I had someone who was in a mental health crisis, and the ambulance took them over to Buford Memorial. And from Buford Memorial, they got there, got assessed, and they were like, well, we don't have any beds here. We called around, and MUSC has beds. And they're like, but you don't have insurance. So someone could take you there, but we can't. And so for me, stuff like that makes it make sense where that shouldn't be, the case. Like, that
Right.
breaks my heart. Like, we should be able to provide that service, but I understand that without having that added in through a revenue base,
I'm going to get to that question in a second. Very, very similar question to that line of thought. Next on the list this was the one outlier that I was telling you about, where it was actually one woman spoke up about this, but I do know I think it's a national issue.
Right.
But it's prevalent. Clearly if it's national, it's in every town.
Right.
So it matters in our town.
Right.
I personally know somebody who lost their son recently here. There's drugs. I said this to Dan, I'll say it again. I think it's a weapon being used against our country, the fentanyl. It's terrible. A born and raised local woman spoke up in one of the groups who was a drug user. She's nearly a decade clean now, which I think is great. And she's very active in the rehab community. And I want to quote her, and I'm going to paraphrase for her. She goes, "It's really hard for someone to get in the doors of detox and treatment here in the Low Country without driving 2+ hours. And this issue isn't slowing down." She says the coroner's office has just seen a massive spike since June. And I preface this with, I don't have those stats, but I'm just reading what she wrote. And then the paraphrasing is, "How can you help gap the road to recovery of drug addiction and alcohol? Offer more Narcan training, help bring resources to light that people don't even know exist, and help the community become aware of the positive outcomes that come from helping the folks that want to change and have change."
So, great question, and I like that. And I'd like to also bring in some other information.
Would love it.
All of what she said, I believe to be true, because I personally know of individuals who have OD'd, and died through fentanyl use. I love the way the conversation in this country is going in terms of all the resources being provided. I wish that this country had always had that same outlook on drugs and the effect of it, particularly going back to the effect of crack in the 80s and how it ravaged particularly Black and brown communities, and split people from their families, all these other things, because they were demonized for it. And I feel that drugs should not be something that we demonize people for in terms of those who are victims of it.
Yeah.
Of course, we want to demonize the people who are bringing these into communities and killing people and taking advantage of communities. But when it comes to the victims of it, being able to, again, look at that as a human being for whatever reason, for whatever they're going through, and who feel the need to find some type of relief through that, there should be resources to help them when they want to come out of that, to be able to navigate, get some recovery, and get on the path to get back on the road to redemption.
Yeah.
And they should not be feel shamed into doing that. So I'm glad to see the conversation now around fentanyl has been changed to where people are not being shamed. And one of the things that's gonna help keep it going in that trajectory is people really understanding and coming out of the shadows that it is not something that should be demeaned. And you have had a lot of politicians in areas where they could have had grants to put up a detox facility or rehab facility or recovery center, have looked down on it. It's almost in a sense of like it's degrading to bring it to your community, because you're addressing a problem and maybe it takes away from the aesthetics.
Do you think we could have one in Bluffton?
We could have it in any community.
Yeah.
But it becomes it becomes the reaction of those who could prevent it from coming. Just like there have been areas where affordable housing could have come up. And you'd be surprised how many people would say, I don't want that anywhere built near my neighborhood, because it's affordable housing is going to bring drugs. It's going to bring crime, and I don't want that here. And the reality is, going back to what I told you about affordable housing, we're talking about a $300,000 home. Who's going to bring crime and drugs to you that's able to buy a $300,000 home? But they think of the people who really need it, the hourly workers, and that triggers this mindset. And it's the same thing that triggers the mindset of those when you talk about bringing and providing recovery efforts for those who are victims of drug abuse. And I think, Bluffton definitely could get one. I think our community should have one. I know of a place right now that it does exist in Bluffton. It's an outpatient place. I had a former worker, who was able to take advantage of that. But it's going to be the stigma really that we change around this conversation to understand that you can't ignore it away. Like, it's not going away.
Right.
People are dealing with it. There are kids in certain areas that are being trained how to give a Narcan, pin to revive a parent who may have OD'd. And if we are at the point where we're having to do that, you cannot ignore it. And so I think the only way to address a problem is to confront it head on and not be afraid of whatever stigmas or projections people are going to give. It's about sometimes doing right is doing sometimes what's not popular. And while that may not be the popular thing to do or maybe what people want to see in the area, it's a need. Yeah. And I think providing the need trumps anything else.
Amen. I totally agree with that. And going back to where I said you hinted on it a little bit, spending. People were worried about tax spending mainly, right? And this is more of a creative question that I thought would be fun to ask. What are, and it doesn't have to be three hard, but if you have like one or two or three of the most important areas where you feel like we could strategically spend more and here's why, and or are there places where you'd say, we need to cut back here and here's why? Do you have any input on that?
Choosing three, that'd be tough.
You don't have to choose three. If you had one strong one you were adamant about.
But I'll give you two. Two that I'm absolutely adamant about is environmental sustainability. I feel that we've got to spend money there and really take an holistic approach to it and understand that it's more than having a green plan around here is more than just getting people from septic to sewer and focusing on water quality. It's everything. Like, we don't have composting stations, around here. We have, in all of our parks, we have trash receptacle bins, sometimes 10 or 12, but there's no recycling bin. And I've seen parties where, people bring in alcohol. Well, if you have alcohol and beer cans for a group of 200, a festival of 500, imagine how many aluminum cans, glass, and trash and stuff is being collected, and all of it just going into the same place. And it's kind of like, if we could really focus around what that looks like and our response to it, to understand that what we do for the environment now is important for future generations to enjoy. And we owe it to the environment because they were the first people here. Before anybody came here, they're the original Binions.
Yeah.
And we should be taking care of our natural environment. So I like to see a focus on stuff like that. Like, how do we really go green? How do we educate people? And how do we bring in more resources and stay on top of studies that are showing where we are with trends of the water temperature rising and other things and how it's going to impact us if we don't, mitigate those issues. The other area where I think we can always spend more is our neighborhood assistance program and going into providing housing for those below that AMI. The neighborhood assistance program has been a really great resource in helping those who currently have homes that are in moderate to low incomes sustain them. They go in and they provide roof repair. They go in and provide floor repairs to elderly seniors who are on a fixed income and are currently only have a bathtub that isn't easy for them to get out of and is slip resistant. They're going in and providing the stand-up showers that with the handicap accessible, things like that. Programs like that, I feel like there's not enough that we can put into that, in a sense of folks in a traditional sense would not be able to get that type of resource outside of something like that. And so I believe in stuff like that.
Okay. Very good. And then finally, we talked a lot about this previous stuff. What is do you have a platform, or do you have certain things that you're running on, or you really push while you are in this elected seat?
Absolutely. It's all encompassing, quite ambitious, but many have come to fruition. So I always advocate for, like I said, neighborhood assistance and access to housing for those that are not in the traditional sense of affordable housing. Those who really are servicing this community, I'm a forever advocate for those individuals, and that's always one of my main platform goals. Also, creating opportunities and outlets here for our youth to enjoy, knowing that growing up in Bluffton and really being at a time where there was nothing for us to do, seeing a change in that and bringing amenities into our parks, and bringing attractions here in that regard that a family can come and enjoy and not think of the cost of funds to do so. Could just be going to a park and letting a kid run around in a splash pad during the summertime. Stuff like that to me matters because it creates that family sense and really creates that idea where we all get to come and meet up and just, enjoy the area together. The advocacy, like I said, that I do around our first responders, because I believe that there are a lot of instances where we see that people don't do things right, whether it's the medical practice, we can focus on teachers who have not done things right, and we can focus on police departments that have not done things right. But our police department is not perfect, but they've done a lot of things right, and I believe in order to retain and keep people who believe that, like you can look up and see a cop, at a family event, or look up and see a cop playing basketball with a kid, or see them in an instance where they're talking someone who's in a mental health crisis down and they're not treating them like a suspect. To retain people like that, we need to create an environment through pay and through other things that allow them to stay here. And the last thing I would say is definitely a platform issue I'm very adamant about is protecting our gullah preservation here. We see in many areas that being a way of life that is being eroded, and it's important, as being a gullah descendant myself, and understanding the impacts culturally it made to the area. How do we protect those descendants in a way that we have to deal with where we are? And that's development and other things that, we can gripe about, but it's here and here to stay. But how do we create a balance that we have not kept up with that does not push people out of their areas? So how do we work and mirror best practices at other areas with the Gullah Overlay District, how they've done that? So those four things, among others, are near and dear to me. It's all about, again, creating a beloved community.
The Gullah Overlay District?
Yes.
Is that what you call it?
Yes.
Is there one now?
There is
Where
one
is
now
that at?
there's one now up in the Edisto area, and then the town of Hilton Head recently is working to enact one. They've not been shy of their fray of controversy over a development issue, but they have since created one. And so some of the things that have come out of that overlay district is just looking at where those lands are. How do they help with the density in those areas to detract commercial development from coming there, even overdevelopment in the sense of larger residential developers, how to protect those areas from being overdeveloped.
And is this just for their residences, or does this involve their whole way of life and commerce, or how does that
All
work?
of it, their whole way of life and commerce. One of the other things there is understanding that being some of the first inhabitants of those lands and communities, knowing that they can't go in and purchase, commercial property in Old Town if they wanted to put up a restaurant or something, or a barbershop or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But they currently own the largest concentration of lands wherever their neighborhoods are. So maybe it's looking at what type of service industries could be allowable there, and allowing them to have that access on their land. So whether it's a home bake business or whether it's a detailing shop, something like that, allowing them to be able to go through the same process, still requiring, to have the permits and the licenses and whatever else, but allowing them to be able to make a way in that sense that ordinarily they wouldn't have that access to.
And you're trying to have something like that happen here in town?
I would love to see something like that happen because it works towards retention. What we're seeing too is through the gentrification and the folks coming here, we're also seeing an exodus of people who they cannot afford to be here.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of the people whose roots are here. They can't afford to be here, and they don't see themselves here because they're not able to tap into some of that economic opportunity that others are. And so it's like, if we have an opportunity to create some type of balance that, works to keep them here, knowing that they will be a part of that preservation, how do we do that? How do we create that semblance with those residents and our municipality?
I'm really interested in that because I didn't know that was A, on your platform, and B, really a thing.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that, as I learn more about Bluffton and you get into the roots and Mitchellville Beach over on the island and all this stuff, it's really eye-opening, the history of Bluffton. And as much as, and I'm part of the problem, A, because I'm a builder, and then B, because I came here pretty recently, like right before the big rush to Bluffton. But everybody came here for a reason. And if we just wash it out, we're going to be like every town we ran from.
Right.
So it's like, the Gola especially, you got to keep and I'm not, I'm trying to make this about you, and here I am saying this.
No, absolutely.
But I feel like if you start deleting the history, and history always evolves, right? And as time goes on, more gets added to history, but that is the roots of this town. And if you start deleting the roots, then it's just going to become like every other town, and that's what I don't want to see.
Absolutely. And and what you said is so true. And it not only does it become every other town, and I appreciate your comments because you get it, and you coming here, you're not the problem, because a lot of what has come to the area wasn't here. As a person who grew up here, we needed, those things. A lot of that has been, a necessary consequence, if you want to call it that, to the growth in this area. But it's allowed individuals who came back like myself to teach. I had a place to come and teach at because now the development provided the need for schools. The need for schools provided the need for other services. So like they work in tandem as just the way of, as we work to create all these other areas, we cannot disregard the ones that go lacking. And so the effects that it's had on the Gullah community has definitely been one that has not gone noticed and recognized. And that's one of the things that I've used during my time in council to help bring that conversation around. A place of like where we are right now would have been what we would have included in the Gullah Overlay District, whereas everyone on this road, can't just open up, a brick and mortar restaurant, but this place was here since '68. And originally he was outzoned. He had the zoning to be commercial, but through the time he was outzoned and this was residential. All that commercial over there, but he was residential. So it was like, how do we address that? Because we can't shut him out, and you can walk to everywhere else that's in steps reach and say it is commercial. And so the town going back in and giving spot zoning here was necessary and unlike anywhere else because he already had it. So it's not like we're giving him something and making special provisions that didn't exist. He had it. It was just going back.
That's why it's here.
That's why it's here, and righting that wrong. So those are the kind of things that the overlay district would go in, and where there's a need to intervene in that sense, this is where you make impact, being able to help keep him here. Because he has a family. Now he has a son. He has grandkids, and they can help keep that same fight and legacy going on that he's kept going from his parents.
Exactly. I like that. Do you have anything else to say to the people?
No, like for you to say like you're just a novice in this, or
I'm just doing this to help.
Whatever, like you've done the questions that were spot on, and the way even that you interjected your own comments. So I'm good. You said everything and asked everything that I could have said.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your time. That was really good. I'd like to thank Bridgette for joining me. I'd also like to, again, give a special thanks to the Bluffton Chamber of Commerce for helping me use their platform as well to get these interviews out there. I believe a voting person should be an informed person, and again, that's why I'm making this series of videos, just to help the town out. I'd also like to ask you to subscribe to the Bluffton Buzz or follow us on Facebook. We will continue to do really cool interviews with I want to bring you on the show, Bridgette, because we didn't talk about all of her cool stuff she does. We're talking about the cool stuff she does for the town. She got so much more to offer. I want to bring your cousin in too, JC.
Oh, he'd love that.
Oh, perfect timing. We got to shut it off. I'm out of here. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.